Absolutely.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Glad to be with you here at Aquarian Series, ULT San Diego. Tonight's presentation is entitled The Razor's Edge, and this will be given to us by our own Laura Gray. So without any further ado, our own Laura Gray. Laura?
Thank you, Monica. Thank you. I'll share my screen because it's always nice to have a few places where we can read together. And so I'll get set up here. I'm screen sharing now from the beginning.
Oh.
Okay. How do we minimize this window here? Oh, here we are. Here we go. Tonight we'll attempt to weave together a few sources of the complex life and task of being human. What is our duty as a human being on the planet supported by the many forms and forces of nature? But before we start, we can add to the mix a few words from Emerson, because why not? He always has something wonderful to say that we can weave into our study. And the first quote is from the November 9th almanac, and it says, "The life of man is a self-evolving circle, which from a ring imperceptibly small rushes on all sides outward to new and larger circles, and that without end." And the other quote is from the Theosophical Movement. It was published in May 2022. And there are three wants which can never be satisfied: that of the rich who want something more, that of the sick who want something different, and that of the traveler who says, "Anywhere but here." Somerset Maugham's book and the subsequent films that were based on the book, The Razor's Edge, tell the story of Larry Darrell, an American pilot traumatized by his experience in World War I, who sets off in search of some transcendental meaning of life. The story begins through the eyes of Larry's friends and acquaintances as they witness his personality change after the war. Though he loved them all very deeply, he was no longer content in their world of dinners, dances, and shallow conversations, preferring to spend his time in quiet contemplation and reading of books on philosophy. He would cut short his time with them, keeping quiet when present in a way that was open, kind, and non-judgmental. Sometimes the razor's edge feels like a dark abyss. It is a leaving behind what we know without yet knowing what it is that we seek. It lies between our world of sense and the living inwardly, a contemplative life of searching for what is real and true. In the book, we see three ways in which humanity avoids pain and suffering: the filling of our life with sense gratification, the running away from suffering through substance abuse, or, as Larry began, a search, a journey, and a search of truth, and a desire he had to help others. The razor's edge, says the Katha Upanishad, is hard to pass over. Thus, the wise say, the road to salvation is hard to cross. The teaching of the Upanishad emphasizes the inner journey and the realization that the divine exists within oneself. The word Upanishad literally means sitting close to or sitting near devotedly. What the Upanishad calls the crossing of a bridge is as sharp as the edge of a razor, is the taking of the middle way of the Buddhists. The Razor's Edge, while a book of fiction, is a very human story, exploring all the aspects of our human nature throughout all the characters of Somerset Maugham's book. And he says near the end of the book that if it wasn't for the Upanishads, he would never have written it. Here's a quote from the Upanishad, the Kena Upanishad. Sent by whom flies out thither the mind, harnessed by whom roves thither the first breath, who sent out the speech which we speak, who is the Deva, the deity, the God, that harnesses the eyes and the ears. This quote suggests a very different way of realizing who we are. It is not enough, as Larry discovered, to control the senses and to be self-possessed. No truth or understanding is gained when all one does is to control the senses from their wanton purposes. That only leads to the practice of Hatha Yoga. Once we realize that we are more than just the ego or the I, a further stage of understanding, a further stage is to understand what being happy and content through the self with the capital letter S means. Beyond that which we call I is the power and the strength and the wisdom of the self, whose ray the I in a body is. It is only when the I sits by the self that the real wisdom of that self can manifest. We must, as the meaning of the word of the Upanishad indicates, sit by or close to that whom or who we are. And in the Bhagavad Gita, this is Krishna, the higher self. In getting ready for tonight, in between the two meetings, was watching a little bit of Bill Moyer, and he brought our attention to, with Joseph Campbell, the story of Black Elk, one of the Sioux tribe, which was very much a part of the American plains, the great people. There were many, many people in that American plains at that time. And he had a vision, and he called the cycles hoops in that vision as well. And he saw many hoops of different sizes coming together in America. And all these hoops were intersecting with each other, creating the landscape that occurred at that time. And he saw himself on a central mountain of the world, the highest place. I had a vision because I was seeing the sacred manner of the world and the sacred central mountain. But he said that central mountain was everywhere. The center of the world is an axis mundi, the central point, the pole around which all revolves. The central point of the world is the point where stillness and movement are together. Movement is time, but stillness is eternity. Realizing how this moment of your life is actually a moment of eternity and experiencing the eternal aspects of what you're doing in the temporary world is the mythological experience, says Joseph Campbell. The boy was saying that there is a shining point where all lines intersect. And he is also saying that God has no circumference. There is a definition, said Joseph Campbell, of God, which is being represented by many, that God is an intelligible sphere, a sphere known to the mind, not to the senses, whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. And it's very important in this idea of the mind being freed from the objects of sense, which is the position that Larry had in the book, The Razor's Edge, where he had left behind any attachment to the senses. And now the mind was in that place of stillness. So to understand that place of stillness, we can look here at the quote from the Upanishad. And I believe this quote is from the Chandogya Upanishad. If anyone strike the root of this great tree, it will flow and live. If anyone strike the middle of it, it will flow and live. If anyone strike the top of it, it will flow and live. So, filled with life, with the self, drinking in and rejoicing, it stands firm. But if the life of it leaves one branch, that branch dries up. It leaves a second, that dries up. It leaves a third, that dries up. And it leaves the whole, and the whole dries up. Thus indeed, you must understand, he said, when abandoned by life, verily, the tree dies. For the soul, but life itself does not die. For that soul is the self of all that is. This is the real. This is the self, and that thou art. We're all familiar, if we've been studying the secret doctrine, this diagram on page 200. And it too can represent a seed, like an acorn that contains the perfect miniature of the tree. Humanity too, individually and as a unity, contains all that is needed to unfold and evolve. Humanity, nature, let me admit someone else here. Humanity, nature, and forces evolve together from the invisible beyond the first plane to the visible through all the cycles and hoops of action and reaction, bringing about the diversity we now see and feel all around us. This diversity is born out of unity. We see that the triangle at the top touches not the first formless plane. We can wonder that this is a symbol for what Krishna, the higher self, says in the Bhagavad Gita. I establish this universe with a portion of myself and remained separate. It would be a mistake to see this as something outside of ourselves, as it would negate our possibility of evolving or becoming more than what we are right now. Such a mistake would take away any responsibility for our current condition, as well as our power to change it. But this mistake, born out of ignorance of separateness, can be overcome when we begin to realize that this self is not in one location, as the young black elk said. It's not in one location or being, but it is everywhere. Its center is everywhere, and its circumference is nowhere. We see the journey that we have first taken, excuse me, within the formless planes, and then the forms of the globes that made possible the earth experience. We would mistake again if we thought this journey was behind us or in front of us, for it is all here now. Nothing comes into existence which does not already exist. The vast intelligences in this diversity are made up of beings that are neither created nor can pass away. And they are of three kinds, we are told. Those who have not yet become human, those who are human, and those who have already passed through the human experience. Like our family, we rely on for our growth and care, we are one with and rely on all these beings for our existence, the many intelligences that make up our forms, and the lines of teachers who watch over the progress of the less progressed. They know each other and work to help orphan humanity. Orphaned because we have forgotten our true nature. From the writings of Mr. Judge, man is but a link in an endless chain of being, a sequence of past eternity of causes and processes, a potentiality born into time, but spanning two eternities, his past and his future, and in his consciousness, these are all one, duration, the ever present. To realize this oneness is the basis of theosophy. It is the only thing that HPB asks us to believe in. She says real theosophy is altruism, and we cannot repeat it enough or too often. It is brotherly love, mutual help, unswerving devotion to truth. If humanity will but realize that in this alone can true happiness be found, and never in wealth, possessions of any kind, or any selfish gratification, then the dark clouds will roll away and a new humanity will be born on earth. Then the golden age will be here indeed. This path is not about getting to a certain good condition, but it is the shining of the light of self as best as we can through all conditions, leaving the results to law. I cannot help but wonder that to be human on the earth is the razor's edge. For those who have given up their life in order to live, who seek to grow their knowledge and understanding, it certainly feels like a razor's edge, a transition state from one to the other by way of our awareness. to realize that we are that, the higher self. It is then just a matter of shaving off our ignorance. A razor used for shaving away what is not real from the uncreate and undying real. The method for this kind of shaving, we are told in this reading, is that of service to others without attachment of any kind. It is to accept everything that comes to us as our own, taking full advantage of the lessons to be learned, and purifying our temporary natures in such a way that the light of our true nature can shine forth. Here we can see an example of the different planes and the balancing that takes place. Theosophy asks everyone to reflect whether to give way to the animal below or to look up to and be governed by the God within. We are in that position at every moment of the day, whether we're aware of it or not. It is the position held by Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. It is a position of each one of us when we stand for a brief moment between two choices. From within the experience of the pair of opposites, our awareness of unity can expand, so that within the temporary world of seeming opposites, we can begin to realize that we are the changeless self, or the traveler, or the pilgrim, or that which moves through the different states and planes of consciousness and remains changeless. The true essence of all beings. And realizing more the self, we can feel its nature of virtue and non-separateness, to begin to live a reflection of that unity, to know the universal one life, and live as brothers and sisters to all of nature and to all nations, not as an ideal, but as a fact. To light the way to an understanding, to light the way to an understanding of the real and the unreal, of the changeless and the changing. We can use the light from the voice of the silence, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Dhammapada. This does not mean that these books are the only source, for this knowledge belongs to each and all and is expressed in countless ways. It is the knowledge which is already ours, but that has been covered over due to countless lives of cause and effect brought about by our identity with things that are temporary. And so the razor's edge is that tool which we can use to shave off that which is temporary, that clouds over our true understanding of who we are. Cycles and law have brought us again to a great global and human turmoil. And we are witnessing more suffering born out of ignorance and can foresee even more around the corner. The diagram on page 200 of the Secret Doctrine illustrates that we are at a critical juncture, a midway point, the densest state, just before the start of our upward return. A karmic opportunity, a razor's edge, a place where we can fall back into reacting with our senses or to use virtue to create better cycles. We live on the fourth globe, the fifth race, where our desire principle is the most developed, and our mind has far more potential than what we're currently using. What we do at this time matters. We are creating the place we will hold in the coming cycles. No one creates our future condition but ourselves, both individually and as a unity. Our evolution as a humanity and as individuals at this juncture is by self-induced and self-devised effort. Sometimes this is hard to see. We can't possibly think or feel that what we are doing at this moment can have any impact. But we can look at this story of the pebble in the pond, just a tiny, insignificant little pebble. We should not think ourselves as so humble that we do not see the importance of our thoughts, our will, and our feeling, and all the lives that not only make up our own mind, body, and astral forms, but all the life that is around us. And once we have become aware that we are not the body, the mind, or feeling, that is the time when we have the greatest work ahead of us in making those instruments or vehicles for helping all that lives. Like a pebble thrown into a pond, it seems small, but the waves from that small pebble set in motion every part of the pond, and not one animal, plant, or stone feels not the movement or the motion of that tiny pebble. And our thoughts and feelings and other actions have an effect on our humanity and nature in the same way. All the conditions of human emotion and action we find ourselves in the midst of, all the climate and geological upheavals brewing, are caused by the forces of our own thoughts and feeling now and from our karmic past. We need to realize that force of our thought and take responsibility for it. As Mr. Judge states, "Arise, O ye Atlanteans, and undo the errors of the past, errors that can only be undone through compassion, knowledge, and wisdom that comes from knowing that which is changeless." There is no striving of the personality in this effort. In fact, we are as personalities to get out of the way. The follower of Raja Yoga, the art of divine living, begins at the top with self-realization. We strive to be the self, then use whatever instrument or condition we possess, be they perfect or imperfect, to serve all life. The more we do this, the more will our personality become a better instrument. Service is the beginning, the middle, and the end of all spiritual evolution. The way to end suffering and pain, the voice of the silent says, is only through virtue. But it is the most difficult of paths to take, and it is uphill all the way. Two quotes from Mr. Judge from letters that have helped me. The work upon which humanity is or should be employed is that of rendering the body more porous, more fluidic, more responsive to all spiritual influences which arise in the inner center, in the soul, which is an undivided part of the great soul of all. To become less receptive of the outside material influences generated by the unthinking world. And from the words of Robert Crosby, when we consider, as we must, that our individual lives stretch back for untold ages and have an illimitable future, and that the present bodily existence is but one small aspect of that great continuous being. We rise above the temporary while acting in it, and seeing more of the right proportions and the relativities, are less involved and less troubled by what may come to us. This of itself is much to be gained. While doing the best you know in your present duty, do not attach yourself to any particular form of result. Leave the results to the law. They will surely come in accordance with it. This is not as dark and as difficult as it sounds, for we are the hero position. We are of not being disturbed by anything that comes to pass. If we sit between the wings of the great bird, if while we're in the midst of the pairs of opposites, we hold the calm position of self, as the Upanishads point to us, we can navigate the changing waters and gain wisdom from doing so. Such wisdom that can only come from loving actions within the sea of change. And this is an image we're probably all familiar with. It's so lovely. The bird that partakes of the sensory world, the one that is eating the seeds and the berries, is that of our personality. And the other represents the Atman, the universal one self that is the perceiver. The higher sees through the eyes of the lower. And if the personality dwells only in the world of senses, the higher self is not able to act through the personality and remains locked up in a cage, as the voice of the silence says, and warbles not. From the book by Somerset Maugham, Larry, though content in himself, self-possessed, looks around within his privileged life after coming back from the war, and having learned the ways of the Upanishads, returns to a life not of the senses, but of duty. Our cycles of karma and reincarnation are for a spiritual purpose. It is for the soul's experience, so that we can go back to the seat of our changeless self with awareness, wisdom, and knowledge. It is why we leave our Father's house in the first place, to return not the same way we left, but with wisdom gained through experience while in the current of the pairs of opposites. At the beginning of this great cosmic cycle called a Manvantara, we picked up the threads of our past, and what we do now determines the threads we pick up in the vast cycles of the next world of manifestation. This evolution has no beginning or end, so like the pebble in the pond, what we think and feel and do matters. We take into heart and mind the teachers, the great teachers, those who have traveled this way before us. We take what they exemplified and left as signposts, the light of their sacrifices, to make not their effort a failure. We should try to make their words our own. The knowledge they have is the knowledge we have. And with the razor's edge, we shave off the unreal so that our true nature can be freed from the growth of likes and dislikes we have surrounded it with. From the Bhagavad Gita. So we see here a different kind of seed. And within this seed of the higher self is contained all. Yoga means nothing but the art of translating the principles of life into practice. The word Sankhya means principles or science, while yoga means the art of translating it into practice. The Gita includes both Sankhya and yoga, the science and the art, respectively, and has thus achieved completeness and perfection. When science and art unite, the beauty of life's blossom into fullness. Science by itself remains on an abstract level. Believe then that the soul you perceive not at all, from that very soul, like the acorn, a great tree comes forth. Believe then that this soul is the self of all that is. This is the real. Knowing this is to have found the razor's edge. With the aid of the self and with the karmic events that come to us that arouse our personality, we can remove the ignorance of separateness and selfishness, and from our thoughts and feelings, making ourselves ready for the ever-present cycle of our evolution. There is a light that shines beyond all things on earth, beyond us all, beyond the heavens, beyond the highest, the very highest heavens. This is the light that shines in your heart. Chandogya Upanishad. Before enlightenment, we plow the field. After enlightenment, we plow the field. This is the journey of ever-widening circles, or as the black elk indicated, hoops. I'll stop sharing for a few minutes and see if we have any comments or questions. Judy?
Yes, thank you, Laura. Magnificent presentation. You spoke about humanity being a great orphan. And of course, Theosophy doesn't think in terms of a big daddy or mommy, but we do think of elder brothers, the solar and lunar Petries, and those who have evolved beyond us through our state, the adepts. So, can we think of it that way? But you spoke of it as perhaps that we are orphans because we have forgotten our true nature, which would be ultimately of the same nature as those who are beyond us, but we haven't gotten there yet. Could
Yes.
you explain this a little further?
Well, thinking about ourselves as orphans for 2,000 years, we have held ourselves as beings that were created by an external God. We think of ourselves as coming from the apes and evolving from those lower forms. And so, in that regard, we have denied our real nature. We haven't been paying attention to it. It's like we locked up our higher nature inside of a church or a box and forgot about it while we lived a life of the senses. And so, in that way, we're orphans. And Edmund Holmes wrote a book on education called What Is and What Might Be. And he says that when we deny ourselves our higher nature, we leave ourselves at the mercy of the lower. And this is where we see our humanity now. It's why HPB came in 1875, was to give us back our true nature, so that we could recognize that we were more than the feelings and the thoughts and the body that we occupy. Desiree?
Hi there, Laura. Good evening. Wonderful presentation. I was going to respond also to Judy's question, and I think when we look at that picture that you showed us out of page 200 of the first volume of the SD, you can actually see how we are orphaned because we're sitting in that one little spot. Everything else has its dual, and it's sitting within a circle. But even as the sign of Venus shows, we're outside of that pantheistic circle once we become objective, fully cognate. We can cognize the fact that we are objective thinkers. So, in that regard, being outside of that pantheistic circle, we, in a sense, are orphaned
Yes. Thank you. It's
temporarily.
something, though, when we take it to heart what the Upanishad says means to sit by the self,
Mhm.
I thought that was lovely, that whole meaning, that to stay close to the idea of the self, kind of like Arjuna standing at the edge of the field with Krishna, and it seems that once we do that, once we take that position, that's when our real work begins. Once we realize that we are not the lower nature, we're not the mind, the body, the feelings, the desires, that's when we have to take it all in hand and do something with it.
Yeah.
And so we're not, as the voice of the silence said, we're not victims of our lower nature anymore, but we have a great work to do. And that work seems in the inner nature within each one of us, there's a huge battle taking place. We can't see the battle, but there's one raging within each one of us, which is truly remarkable, very mythical,
Yeah.
if we can stop for a moment and consider that battle. And as it says in the Secret Doctrine as well, that all the lives that used to occupy the dinosaurs and the astral plane, those are the same lives that we're using now. And the masters and the lives that we're going to use when we become adepts or great teachers are the same lives that we are using now. And so we have a responsibility for transforming them. And all the works that we have in the Upanishads is the psychological work that we have to do in order to make those changes to become an adept, which is remarkable and truly mythical in that journey. Did you have something further to add, Desiree?
I really, when you showed the picture of the pebble going into the water and these rings coming off of it, it just reminds me that, yes, your thoughts are force. And even though we might be thinking quietly by ourselves, those thoughts are active. And yeah, does it matter how small that pebble is?
No, it doesn't. And you know what's so remarkable about that story? It was brought to my attention by my grandson, who's 9 years old.
Wow.
And it's from a book called, it's a comic book. It's about cats and creatures. And in this book, they discover their own inner strength. It's a children's story, which was very interesting to consider. And he brought it to my attention, the idea of how powerful we are, just as a pebble is powerful. Yeah.
That gives me hope.
And it was nice to see, there it is, the Upanishads in a cartoon, in a comic strip, for children, right there. It was so lovely to see. Yeah. Shobha?
Gosh, it was beautiful.
Yeah. Shobha?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely presentation. I was just thinking, I have a comment and then a question. It's wonderful that you talked about The Razor's Edge. I read the book when I was very young, and I think I need to go back to it to read it again. I used to love Somerset Maugham. My question is, when you're at the razor's edge, there's also this question of balance and focus that needs to be part of one's psyche and alignment. What do
Yes.
you think about that?
Well, I think that was in the beginning of the talk there, in the invitation that was sent out, that balance, that point of balance. And one of the things that comes to mind is from a book that I really enjoy. It's called Wind by Jan de Plo. And at the beginning of the book, it says, "We live between two oceans, one of air and one of water."
Mm.
And it's so lovely to think in that way. And here too, as humanity, the razors, this is why I think that being a human is the razor's edge, because we exist between the animal and the divine. And we have to bring the two of them together. And that is such a beautiful place to be, in that we can grow and become more aware. You know, in the Voice of the Silence, it talks about the two paths. And we can take the path to get out of that position of being between the animal and the divine. You know, we can just leave the animal behind and go into a perfect and blissful state of nirvana. And but the hardest path, most difficult path, the one that Theosophy exemplifies, is the path that we don't leave the animal behind, but that we have found that point of balance between the divine and the animal, from which we can raise up all nature, from which we can gain a greater experience, so that when we begin the next Manvantara Center cycle, we will have, through that experience, created new threads for us to pull together in the next Manvantara, that we can evolve. Whereas if we just abandon the animal and leave that part of us behind, we don't gain any experience from that. We don't learn from that. So we have to have that point of balance, that we're not animal and we're not divine, but we're human, and that is the human duty. The duty of humanity is to shine the light of the higher through the lower. And we have to have the point of balance to do that.
Thank you. Could you possibly give us the name of the book? Could you put it in the chat or something for us?
The name of the book for...
Yeah. The book
one?
that you mentioned, Wind by Jane.
Oh, Wind by Jan de Plo. Yes.
Jan de Plo.
If it's on my shelf here. It's just, no, I don't see it. It's Wind, Wind, and it's by Jan, Jan, and then it's capital D, E, and then capital B, L, I, E, U.
Thank you so much.
Yes, yeah. It's a lovely book. You will enjoy it. I read it every summer.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Laura, could I ask you a question?
Sure, Jonathan.
Speaking of wind and oceans and balance, one of your slides had those stones.
Yes.
And I was looking at the stones and I was thinking to myself, if I was going to set that up, how would I do it? And I was thinking that probably I would need the help of another person to do that. That's quite a picture. Now,
Yes.
maybe computers, you could do that with Photoshop, but let's just say that that's a real picture that somebody did. And so I'm thinking, and then you were talking about the balance, finding the balance within. And it seems that finding the balance within is a very individual effort. You really have to become attuned to what's going on within you. But then working with somebody else, setting up those stones in cooperation with others, would that person need to find a balance within them to do it? And would the two need to find some kind of a balance, I guess, with each other, a balancing of diversities?
Yes. And if we take that metaphorically and look at it from the point of view of karma, then two things can occur to help find that balance and to help to create the beauty of that is when two things. One is that we recognize that everything that comes to us is an opportunity, a karmic event. And so when someone presents to us a difficulty in, say, a relationship or we can see here in with the Palestinian and the Jewish situation, not that I want to get into that, but they have that, they're making that statue. They have to accept each other, and in order to reach the next plane, in order to reach the next level, they have to let go of who they think they are and become more of who they really are. And I think that most of the people in that conflict have already done that. They are working together. They are trying to balance, to create that new effort, but they still have the karma of the past that they have to deal with. And that's where our karmic past checks us. It helps us to make sure that our foundation is strong enough to allow us to move to the next level. And so if we can look at all the conflicts that we have in life from that point of view of trying to help us to get to the next level, then we can help each other in building those stones and putting them in the right position so that it can support the next level that we are trying to achieve.
Thank you.
Yeah. And now it's when we realize that we are not the lower nature, then it's our job to turn it into a great Mahatma. So how do we begin that process? Where do we start with our lower natures and the conditions that they're in now? And how do we take that first step towards impressing all these lives and turning them in to that great Mahatma? I mean, there's the psychology of the Bhagavad Gita, the work that we have to do in the Dhammapada. It brings the razor's edge. Like, here's one edge that we live on. It's from verse 3 in the twin verses, and it says, "He reviled me, he beat me, and conquered, and then plundered me. Who express such thoughts tie their mind with the intention of retaliation, and in them hatred does not cease." And then verse 4 says, "He reviled me, he beat me, and conquered, and then plundered me. Who do not express such thoughts, in them hatred will cease." So there we see the razor's edge between the animal and the divine. And we have to do that within every one of our 7 principles. We have to take that razor of balance, and we have to shave off what is unreal from what is real. And that is a very long, not an easy process. And as the voice of the silent says, it's uphill all the way, and your feet are going to be cut and bleeding. And you can fall any minute now, which then brings to mind the importance of working together. Because when one of us falls, we can help each other to get up again and balance those stones and try again.
Thank you.
Mhm. And we can have a sense of humor in all this because we know those stones are going to fall and they're going to land on our toes and it's going to hurt. And we're going to pick them up again and we're going to try to create that new base again until we can succeed.
We got a question in the hall. Ken Campos up to the thing.
And then Judy.
Laura, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I wanted to go back to the imagery of the two birds. So one of them is eating the seeds and the fruit. So that's going to be like the human that's in the lower, that's attached to all the senses and that sense of separate identity. And the other bird is said the Atma bird, the one that's just the watcher. And so in this Razor's Edge idea of cutting away the unreal, and yet the two birds are eternal companions. So we're cutting away something, but yet still remaining in it. Is that connected to this bodhisattva idea that you mentioned from the voice of the silence, that one ascends, but then you have the two paths to become the Pratyeka Buddha or the Bodhisattva Buddha? Is that how the two bird image kind of relates to these other ideas?
Well, we think so, but again, we can look at it from the point of view of who we are as sense beings. We're going around, we're eating the fruit and we're having a good time. And we've left the other bird kind of stuck in a cage somewhere. You know, we've been ignoring him for many lifetimes and we have not been making the sacrifice. Eating and drinking and taking care of ourselves should all be a form of sacrifice to the bird that is the Atman, that is the real. And so the personality has forgotten about that. Like I say, put it in a box and we don't visit it very often. And so, but once we begin to understand the nature of sacrifice, then we recognize, and we have to, as the Upanishad says, sit by that Atman, sit by that other bird, not leave it, and let it out of the cage so it can warble through and sing to us. And because its voice can only be through the vehicle of the lower. If we don't turn towards Krishna, the higher self, then it remains, It remains unexpressed. It remains latent within us. It says the Christ shines in all, which is that bird that is the perceiver, but in all it does not shine forth. Does that answer a little bit of what your question is?
Yes, that does. Thank you for that. I appreciate the analogy. Also, the other analogy about that it's only through the wisdom of our experiences in the manifested world. As you said, we leave the Father's house, but then come back to the Father's house, another analogy, but can come back only with the wisdom of a life that we've participated in. And the idea that there are no little things is also fascinating to me. So I appreciate that with the pond story, that there are no little things. Each thought and each little action has an impact on the whole.
That's right. That's right. Well, as when we return to our Father's house, we can say, well, I did it. It wasn't pretty, but I did it. And, even the masters of wisdom, they look at what we have gained, not how we gained it, but what we have gained, what we have come to understand is what they are interested in. And so, Judy.
Yes, thank you for everything that's been said. I think in the secret doctrine, the Upanishad is translated as literally meaning sitting at the feet of a master in order to obtain secret spiritual knowledge. And in the Razor's Edge, Larry goes and does literally study with a master in India. But when he returns, what impressed me about the movie, I haven't read the book, but I saw the old movie with Tyrone Power, is that he doesn't despise his former friends. He loves them, but he seems to have the razor's edge of trying to be in that world, but not of it, trying to be human, even though he has attained something more than they have. And this seems to be the great difficulty, trying to walk that razor's edge of living in this world with those who are wanting to pull us down. You know, why aren't you drinking anymore? And you know, why aren't you being with the crowd? You know, where is your ambition and all of this other stuff? So I think that is the greatest difficulty you pointed out. But once one has even a glimpse of that secret spiritual knowledge, then how can we manifest it without appearing snobbish or uncaring about others? That seems to be something we've all had to face
Yes,
and will face on this path.
that's right. Well, there are many family and friends that I have that think of what I'm doing tonight as a kind of a hobby, you know, and which is fine because the voice of the silence says that we have to appear as nothing in the eyes of men. And I think that that's what it means, you know, that here we are as students, you know, working on that razor's edge, and no one can see the work that we're doing. No one can understand it, but they are seeing its effects. They are seeing the effect of it through the actions that we and the lives that we lead and the actions that we perform and the thoughts that we share. So, you know, and that's why Larry showed it to his friends. You know, they could see that there was something very special there. They loved him dearly, you know, so they could see that there was something there. Um, but yeah, we have to appear as nothing in the eyes of men. We have to be
Yeah,
invisible
good answer.
in that effort. And then we have to, not only that, we have to be able to see that invisible effort in other people. And we have to make friends with it, and we have to exemplify it and bring light to it wherever we see that effort taking place, and whomever it is. You know, even the alcoholic, when the 100 times a day he might fight the desire to have a drink. We have to honor that. We have to see that struggle, and we have to recognize it within others as well as within ourselves. And because at any moment we could fall, as the voice says, and as that picture at the front with the man standing at the pinnacle of the mountain, you know, which side are we going to fall on? And we have to go all the way back down to the bottom of the mountain, and then we have to start rolling up that stone again. So that's where compassion comes in for each other. Any other thoughts or questions?
I have a question if no one else does right now,
Yeah.
but I leave time and space for others to ask if they have a question. Okay, my question has to do with, I guess, timing. And just with the analogy of when you have children and you watch them go through their struggles, when to say something and when not to. It seems like a razor's edge. Likewise, there must be, that in turn is probably an analogy for something, more dealing with higher stakes even than that, where there must be beings that are watching humanity, and it must be quite the razor's edge, I would think,
Yes.
to know
Oh,
when to do things and when not to. Go ahead, sorry.
no, that's wonderful. It's we can appreciate the sacrifice that the great teachers, put forward for us, and continually, in many ways, in many forms, to put the same truths before us in countless ways. And we too do the same thing with our children in countless ways throughout the day. And sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we get it wrong. And but there's the struggle, is to try to find the right thing to say to the right person at the right time in the right way with the right tone of voice, And as my grandson will say to me very clearly, "Grandmother, you're not helping." Whenever I'm trying to give wisdom, they let me know when it's working and when it isn't working. Very clear in that. Yeah. No man is our friend or our enemy. Yet as time goes on, we grow to love or hate some of them in particular. What is it that creates that hatred? What is it that creates that love? Its basis is in our thoughts. And one student asked in the Bhagavad Gita class the other day, what is the difference between seeing and perceiving? I think this is very key to understanding how we create attachments, is to understand the difference between seeing and perceiving. Does anyone have a thought on that?
Well, I'd like to say I think there are those moments when perception gets in the way of what is actually there to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that there are those moments when seeing can be a potential block to compassion. And so each condition, I believe, offers an opportunity.
Yes.
And clearly, some way of going beyond both or blending both. I don't know, is that adeptship?
Well, it would seem so. That's what we're working towards. That to understand, to be able to discern between seeing with our preconceived ideas or seeing from the point of view of unity or compassion. And Judy, do you have a thought on the difference between seeing and perceiving?
Yes, just very briefly, I think one can be rather passively tamasic in a situation, or one can really try to perceive what is going on and try to be sattvic and actively help out. I think that would be one distinction that we could make, and not just let ourselves get dragged through life, but try to really see something intelligently and give the right answer, as you were saying, and it's not always easy to do that.
No, it isn't
But
always easy.
yes, but it's a good distinction to make.
Mhm. Something that Mr. Judge says about the point of balance that was talked about earlier is that he says that if we're not in that point, that we shouldn't do anything. He says that all we're going to do is create karma. And he says we should have that. If we aren't in that place, that center between the divine and the animal, then we can't, what we say or do is going to be unbalanced. It's going to have an attachment of some kind, and we have to find that. Another way of seeing that is we have to raise above the three qualities and look with an equal mind at those three qualities. Shobha?
Sorry. I was thinking, I thought I liked what Monica had to say, and also what Judy said. I mean, it was beautiful because it all depends on how you look at the word seeing and perceiving. However, I was also thinking this is where our self-examination is crucial, because then we know why we like certain people and don't like others. That's again seeing and perception, right? Something about somebody attracts us and we like them. Something about somebody we cannot stand and we don't like them. So what is it? And that's where we need to look within ourselves and see why we create these kinds of and this is the question, this is the conversation one needs to have and say, what is going on here?
Yes.
Why am I doing this? What is my lower mind telling me? What is it that I like about this person or not like about this person? It's a very difficult thing to do, but it's a crucial thing to do in
That's
this
right.
whole thing about seeing, perceiving, how we look at things, again, that's where the Patanjali's thing about concentration, looking at an object, how do we look at things? How do we look at people? How do we look at things? It's fascinating to see that when we really start questioning that, we realize, wow, where are we?
Another way we can put that same dilemma that we find ourselves in is to ask ourselves what's preventing that bird, the Atman, from singing, from shining forth. What's stopping it from coming out? And that's where we have to remove or knock off the edges of our attachments. And one of the problems with attachment is that no matter how many we remove, there always seems to be more. So it's a constant process, it's like every veil we remove, there's another veil behind it. And so this is that whole idea of the razor's edge, is the removing of all those veils. And so it's a constant process. In order to be able to express the higher self through the lower, it requires the lower to give up its attachments. And those attachments, we've been working on those for a long time. And as Arjuna says, I don't want to get rid of them. I kind of like them. I want to hang on to my attachments. That's where I get my identity from, And he throws down his weapons of compassion and virtue. He just throws those down and says, I don't want to do this. So.
Oh,
thank you.
Would you say that, could you speak to the chapter 13 in the Gita about the importance of being able to discern, I guess, the difference between the knower and the field in relation to the razor's edge?
Yes. What is the difference between the knower and the field in regards to the razor's edge? Well, the field that we're working on and working in is the sevenfold nature. And so the knower is the knowing that we are not that nature, but we are the divine adjuster of it. And so we take that position of adjusting our sevenfold nature at every moment of the day. Every action, we're either adjusting our nature to shine through it better, or we're falling victim to it and reacting to the karmic energies around us. And so we have to be mindful of what we are doing. There's that, I think in the Bible, I'm not that familiar with it, but there's this idea that Jesus, on that moment of temptation, that, where you can go one way towards the divine, or you can go the other way towards the animal and the lower nature, and give into it. But the karma and the cycles are going to constantly bring you back to that point of making a choice. If you make the wrong one, you're going to come back and have an opportunity to make that choice again. And so there's that cycle that's constantly going. And if we fall down and react rather than taking hold of that field and acting for and as the self of all, then karma is going to keep bringing us back to that point. And the thing to remember about that point is that it's every moment of our day. It's every moment. It's every lifetime. It's every manvantara. Because, the small cycles and the great cycles are all one within that. And so the field is our natures that we're working on. And the knower is the self that is trying to shine through that nature. We have a few comments. I'll read them out. Let's see what they say, if they help us further. One comment from Betty is, so those that have attained such wisdom, such as the ascended masters, do they send back their teachings to those on earth? Well, looking at this idea of the masters, that it's like with our children, if we can maybe use that as an analogy. If I'm in a different building than my children are in, then can I give them wisdom and knowledge from a half a block away or a block away without any contact? It seems that no, I have to be with them. I have to be with them all the time. The masters they're still here with us, whether we see them or not. They're still here. They have gone through everything that we are going through now. And one must think that their help is very real. It's here now, just as in the relationship with a parent and a child. So I don't think they send their teachings back. They exemplify their teachings. So that's one way of looking at it. Does anyone else have a thought on that? Truth sent in a comment. Seeing appears to involve the world play of navigating the sea. Seeing, if the body is like a boat, which the soul is directing, then like Vishnu, it is resting upon a sea. That sea has been compared to Maya, to the fullness of the seeming void. The element of water has been associated with emotion. And then, interestingly, the tides are influenced by the moon, which is our lunar past, our astral impressions from the past. Wonderful comment. And that idea of navigating the sea and the body is like a boat. It brings to mind my favorite line out of Winnie the Pooh. When he is floating in the flood on top of a honey jar. And he says, when I'm on top of it, it's a boat. When I'm under it, it's an accident. And I think in this idea of navigating the sea of Maya, we have a lot of accidents. And we get caught in it and we fall under it. And that's where we have to help each other, to pull each other out of that sea of Maya, to remind each other of who we really are. And that's an important part of universal brotherhood. And not judging others and having compassion is to recognize that we're all drifting on that sea of Maya. And we all forget who we are at times. Monica, you're standing at the podium. You have some closing words or a question?
Well, unless anyone has more questions or comments they'd like to make. Anyone? Miluka has a comment in chat.
Okay. Oh, she says thank you. Well, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. It's wonderful to contemplate these ideas. That's a very important part of the work of the masters, is they gave us the words. The words in themselves do not contain the truth. It is only when we contemplate those words, it's only when we apply them to our daily life and that we sit with them, as the Upanishad says, sit with those words is like sitting with the higher self. And through contemplation, we begin to discover the wisdom and the knowledge that is already there within us.
Magnificent. Okay, then. Thank you so much, Laura Gray, for this fantastic presentation. We'd like to remind everybody that next week, the title of the presentation will be The Clock, and that will be presented to us by Mr. Kirk Grady. And we hope that all of you will come back and be with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll see you.
Wonderful contemplation. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Good one.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Laura.